right now. And so it is starting streaming as of right now.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining my session today. We're going to be talking about communicating and writing, just generally speaking, and then more specifically during a crisis, since, as we all know, we're in the midst of a pandemic right now, and that affects how we communicate. But first and foremost, I just wanted to share a little bit about me, just so you know what I bring to the table in today's workshop. My name is Julie Mayo, and I work at SUNY System as a correspondence coordinator in the Chancellor's office. And I also help out with our communications team, working on things from blog posts to social media to press releases. And that's a lot of what I did in my prior role as a communications assistant. And before SUNY, I was born and raised in New York, but I was a communications specialist for Illinois State University in their Office of Admissions. And I oversaw all of their social media accounts, an intern team, and a call center for reaching out to prospective students. So far in my professional career, I've had a good breadth of different communication roles. And hopefully that'll lend itself to teaching you some things in today's session. I've also taught college level public speaking, and I'm going to bring a bit of my teaching experience to today's workshop to do an interactive activity at the end. And then just so you know, my personal educational background, my degrees are in communication, and then I also have a graduate certificate in women's and gender studies. So that's just a little bit about me. Today, I just want to briefly dive into grammar and proofreading tips and tricks, because if we're going to talk about writing, it's good to have a foundation of skills to build from. And then the bulk of today's workshop will really be diving into how external and internal communications are affected by a crisis, namely the one that we're in right now with the COVID pandemic. And then, as I mentioned before, we'll do an activity at the end to kind of do some hands-on learning with some of the things I talked about. So hopefully you'll have some concrete takeaways from today's session. Okay. So first and foremost, and if you've ever attended a workshop with me about writing, I've pulled up this resource every time because I think it's a great one to have in your back pocket. So you might want to bookmark it, and I'll share the link with Taryn so she can share it with you all. But this resource that I'm going to pull up now really is a great guide for going through a lot of the different grammar errors that we come across. I'm not going to waste your time reading through everything, but it's just to make you aware of this resource so you can use it moving forward. So things from, using an apostrophe with its to comma placement. I know that that's a skill, that we develop over time, and it can really make or break a writing assignment. To just your general grammar tips, when do I use then? When do I use than? Things of that nature. So like I said, I'm not going to read through this resource, but just know that it'll be included in the Prezi link that's shared with you all. And to make the argument of why grammar is important, it can affect the meaning of your writing. And if we don't refine our grammar skills, it can take away from, the reader's understanding of what we're saying, which, as I'll talk about later, is really important when you're trying to communicate during a crisis. And then at the bottom of this resource are proofreading tips. I'm going to pop back over to my Prezi here because I pulled out some that I think are especially important. And I'm someone who used to really not like proofreading my own work, because when we're at the end of an assignment, you just want to turn it in. But being able to develop proofreading and copy editing skills really will set you apart from your peers in the workplace, because it is a skill that not everyone likes to refine. And, more importantly, it'll help you when you are putting together writing outputs. It'll, if there are errors in something that you send out to the general public, that may reflect poorly on you and your organization. So it's definitely a skill that you want to develop. So just some tips and tricks that you might want to jot down here as you're following along. If you're just starting out proofreading, a suggestion is to read a document and only look for one error at a time. So what does that mean? You'll read through your document and I'm just going to make sure that, this is formal writing. It shouldn't have contractions. So let me just read through and make sure there aren't any contractions. The next time you read it through, it might be to make sure that your subject, verb, tense is agreeing, and so on and so forth. Another great thing to do is to proofread out loud. This, if you have a paper even, and if you feel comfortable reading it out loud to yourself or even to someone else, it'll help you recognize where you might have run-on sentences or clunky language or other confusing things phonetically that you want to switch up. The next point, and again, this is something that we have to get comfortable with as writers, make sure that you do feel comfortable sharing your work with others because they might catch things that you wouldn't. Because, I know, for instance, if I've been working on something for a really long time, your eyes kind of gloss over it the next time you have to read it. So a fresh pair of eyes is always helpful. And in addition to that, they might give you some perspective that could bolster your writing output. The next one, reading it backwards, it doesn't mean, read it completely backwards from right to left, but to maybe start at the very bottom of your document and work your way upwards, so that, it just allowing your brain to process the information differently and you might catch something new. And then this last one, if you have access to a printer, I find that it's a lot easier to proofread something when I have a hard copy in front of me and I'm following along with a pen. Sometimes it's, I know you can do track changes on the computer, but it's just, a different way to proofread that might make it easier for you depending on your preferences. Okay. And in terms of general writing tips, right before we, dive into analyzing other people's writing in the workshop, here are again some tips that you might want to write down. First and foremost, utilize resources available to you. And this could mean a plethora of things. It could mean, a writing center on campus. It could be a supervisor, a professor, or a friend. It could mean, a resource guide, a book that you have available to you. So don't, forget that you can reach out and ask for help when you're writing. The next thing is, writing is a skill just like anything else. So we need to practice it as much as we can to further develop these skills. So, I know we're entering into the summer months here, and if you don't have the opportunity to write because you're not taking classes, maybe if you're in an internship or doing a volunteer opportunity, you can work writing assignments into that role. And just, or you could even do creative writing on your own free time to make sure that these skills don't get rusty. And similarly to proofreading or having someone look over your work, don't be afraid to ask for help. It also ties into utilizing your resources. Again, it could be, a friend, a professor, an advisor, someone who you look up to. And over time, if you're not comfortable sharing your writing right now, I definitely understand that. It can be a vulnerable place to put yourself in, especially if it's a writing piece that you feel strongly about. But if you ask for help, again, you get that outside feedback and a different frame of reference to review your work. And then this last one is more so specific to if you're writing something like a press release or a memo or a blog post. Say it's your first or second time doing this and you're not sure how the layout should look or whether it's formal or informal. Make sure that you are using the resource that is Google, and you can simply just Google memo sample. And that's a way to, figure out how to tackle a new form of writing if you find that you can't ask someone for help or don't have any other resources. So that's just kind of laying the foundation for proofreading, grammar, and general writing. But now I would like to transition into, just some thoughts that I have about communicating during a crisis. And again, keep coronavirus in the back of your mind as, thinking of examples. So first and foremost, it's really important to communicate clearly and convey your messages concisely, especially with this crisis that we're in right now, because it has to do with health. right? It's a virus and it's infecting people, and people are scared. Uh, so when we're communicating about things related to this crisis, we don't want to use medical jargon that might confuse people. It's not to say that if you're speaking with medical jargon that's not being clear, but we want to understand who our audience is and what background they bring to the table. Obviously, if we're communing with healthcare workers, that message is going to look differently than maybe the lay person, if you will. But regardless of who you are communicating with, you want to again make sure that message is clear and not confusing. You don't want run on sentences or paragraphs when it's something that you could say maybe in a sentence or two. This second point, and I guess I'm somewhat biased, I find this to be most important. And usually, me just as a personal communicator, I try to come into every interaction from a humanistic standpoint, if possible, if it's applicable. I'm sure many of you may be feeling stressed, anxious, scared about the state of the world right now. And if you're not, understand that the mental space your audience is in, they may be coming from a place of fear. So by leading with compassion and being able to step into a space of empathy, we're meeting our stakeholders or constituents where they are. And that, creates a much better communication transaction than maybe being transactional in our speech and not bringing in feelings and positivity when appropriate and compassion when possible. um, you might find in your SUNY SA role, maybe you have peers reaching out to you asking questions about campus communications. And for instance, I had a parent reach out to me, and they were very upset that their students still had to pay rent for off-campus housing. And while I had the answer ready for this person, they were wanting me more so to listen. So that's also a huge part of this equation too, is not only just communicating, speaking, but listening to people to really get a better grasp of what are they looking for. Do they just want bulleted information? Are they looking for someone to give them advice, or do they just want someone to listen? And that kind of falls in line with finding the right approach. And this is a skill that you'll develop over time as well. And every interaction is going to be different because we are all different as people, of course. So one phone call about the same topic might not go the same way with the same topic with someone else. And the last point for this slide is to communicate confidently. Given the situation that we're in, if you follow along with the governor's briefings, his directives may change one day to the next based on the information that he's receiving. Of course, as he says, there's no predetermined plan for all this. We're learning as we go. So when you do talk with people, it's okay to say, I don't know, I don't have the answer, but then follow that up with, I will get back to you as soon as I can with the correct information. And, trust the information that you're receiving and sharing with others. And like I said, it's okay if you don't know something right off the bat, because the landscape that we're in right now is constantly changing. And hopefully, as the days continue, there will be more concrete information that we can share. But until then, it's okay to say that you don't know and still remain confident. So this slide is more so about organizational communication. The first point, so let's just say I am a social media manager for Nike, and we are going to launch this brand new shoe, and then coronavirus hit. Obviously, it wouldn't be appropriate to do this big marketing campaign around a shoe while there's a health pandemic going on, unless, of course, we got creative and the funds raised from selling the shoe go to frontline workers, but that's a whole other workshop topic. So the point being is assess, what pre-planned communications you had in the docket, and anything that's no longer relevant or appropriate, you can triage or put that to the side for if and when it is appropriate to share again. In terms of all internal or external communications, you also want to loop your employees in, the employees who maybe aren't in your communication shop. You want to make sure that these people are armed with the correct information that you're sharing before you do so, because they, of course, are stewards of your business, ambassadors, if you will, and you want everyone to be on the same page, so that, going back to the prior slide, you're sharing clear information and it's consistent across the board. And to that end, you want the tone of your external and internal messaging to be similar. It wouldn't be so great to, as an employee, to see, oh, look at all this uplifting external messaging, and then internal wise, it's either the tonality isn't matching up or is off, or I'm not even receiving anything. So you want to make sure that you're uniform across the board. And the last point, this is more generally speaking, not specific to coronavirus. If maybe, let's say, you've come out the other end of a crisis and you can find a way to make light of it, or use humor, of course, in an appropriate sense, that's a good way to, foster belongingness between people. In terms of lighthearted messaging, I know, with SUNY, we're doing a lot to highlight all the different great things that our campuses and students, including, some of you, I'm sure, are doing, whether it's the 3D printing of face shields that our campuses are doing and sending to frontline workers, to organizing food drives, to getting laptops to students who are in need. There are so many uplifting messages that have come about since the coronavirus pandemic has hit our state and worldwide. So even though you're in a crisis, it doesn't all have to be sad, somber, down messaging. Again, when appropriate, find the silver linings that you can share while remaining appropriate, of course. Okay, and then we have about 5 minutes left. So, like I said, kind of bringing my teaching background here, I really like doing activities that are interactive so that you can kind of take what I just talked about and apply it to a real life situation. So if we could just maybe take 2 to 3 minutes, and then I'll, open up the chat here to try to foster a dialogue based on these questions. But what I'd like for you to do is to find a non-academic organization. It could be your favorite clothing store or a grocery store or a church, it doesn't matter. Go to one of their social media channels, and then basically I just would like you to assess, their recent communications based on the questions that I have up here on the slide. So go ahead and take some time to do that. If you have any questions, feel free to share them in the comments section or in the chat via Zoom. And yeah, I'll give about like 2 to 3 minutes. And since we only have a couple minutes, feel free to just pick one of the bullets to answer. I, don't expect you to get through all those questions in just a couple minutes here. So just focus on one and then we'll regroup. All right, give you one more minute. All right. Going to open up the chat here, and hopefully we can just have a quick little discussion with some real world examples. All right. So one person chose Apple Music and shared they've been doing a lot of videos of people across the country sharing their experiences with the time that we're living in right now. They noted that their messaging is very empathetic and heartwarming. And okay, they also shared that in comparison to Twitter, this organization or account has been posting silly content instead of talking about coronavirus. So yeah, that is a really interesting thing to pick up on. Maybe they know that their audience on Twitter or just Twitter in general would be more susceptible to silly things or humorous content that isn't related to coronavirus. But in terms of video content, whatever platforms they share that on, maybe they know their demographic would really hound them if they weren't directly speaking to coronavirus in a way that is empathetic and connects with people. Does anyone else have any examples or, just thoughts about this topic or how it's showing up in their own lives? Okay, I'll read this last one here, and then I know there's someone else who's talking at 7, so I don't want to cut into their time. But okay, this next submission was they picked Transformation Church, and they've been very empathetic to the situation, and they've given updates on coronavirus and shared inspiring words and videos. So I think, oh, and it said they also made sure they were able to catch up things they have missed, like live videos. So I think that this also raises a good point. It's a church. So most people go to church, if not all, to get in touch with their spirituality. So, of course, it's pretty appropriate for a church or another faith based organizations to tap into that more inspirational speech or really get into the weeds with emotions and empathy and things of that nature. Whereas, maybe if you saw Goldman Sachs or an organization that has to do with the stock market, it might seem a little opportunistic depending on how they phrase it. So thank you for those comments. And then last one here uh, raises a good point that it's challenging to find the right balance between talking about heavy emotional things too much versus not addressing the situation enough. Yeah, it really can be a tough balance to strike. There's not a formula for it. For every one emotional post, do one transactional one. I think it goes back to understanding and surveying your constituents or stakeholders and maybe what, personas they bring to the board. And then also tying back into the point of what, aside from a health pandemic, what is the sole function of your organization? If it's a church, then sure, dive into those emotions and process them. But again, if it's something having to do with finances or a business to business, more transactional organization, it might not seem authentic to do that. So yeah, I think a lot of these skills come with practice, and that's what we're all kind of doing here as we navigate through the time that we're in. It's something that most, if not all of us, have never lived through before, and we're learning and trying to understand how to better communicate with everyone. But yeah, I thank you all for tuning in today. If you have any questions, I'll leave my contact information with Taryn, and feel free to reach out to me whenever. But yeah, I think the main takeaway, and again, this is my own bias, is to just really try to lead from a place of compassion with your communication and see, where that takes you moving forward. All right. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you so much, Julie.
You're very welcome.